Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 98 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on 3 harmful beliefs that can hurt our relationships. This is a really good episode because it taps into cognitive psychology and social psychology, and I've really enjoyed writing this because we tackle a lot of myths, which is always fun to do. And it's Saturday, the 19th of June 2021 as I record this. So moving on to psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, and there were some quite good articles, and this first one I really do like. Okay, so at just 16 months old, toddlers will reward someone for acting fairly. Although we often think of young children as rather selfish, researchers show that babies and toddlers have a surprisingly strong sense of what is fair. At 1 year old, kids already expect resources to be divided fairly and for people to be helpful towards others. By 2, they themselves tend to distribute resources equally and would rather play with a fair adult than an unfair one. But at what do young kids actually intervene when they see someone else acting unfairly? According to a series of studies in cognition, before they're even 1.5 years old, children will reward someone for being fair, though they don't yet punish unfair behaviour. So this I just think is one of those wow articles, because as the article said, we always think that children are really selfish, and also, as we've spoken on the podcast before, children can be quite manipulative. So I covered this in a psychology news section quite a while ago about how babies know, but if they cry, they'll be able to manipulate others to get fed, get attention and everything there. But I think this is really good that it talks about pro-social behaviour, and it shows that babies actually do have a really good sense of fairness, which I think is really surprising. But I think it would also be quite interesting to look at when do we start to lose this ability, or when does the development come in, when we start to think that it's okay to be unfair to others, because as much as we all don't like to admit it, sometimes we're all a bit unfair to other people. So moving on to another one. How to navigate moving back in with your parents as an adult. Oh, this should be interesting. For many, moving out of the family home is a rite of passage, a sign that adulthood is just about to begin. Equally, however, there are plenty of reasons why someone might have to move back in with their parents after a breakup, which happened to my brother, to save money, for health reasons, or to care for aging or unwell relatives. Anecdotally, the COVID-19 pandemic seems to be enough reason for such a move, with articles proliferating on children once more living with their parents and offering advice how to deal with it. But how do such boomerang kids frame their decision to move back home, and how do they ensure it goes well? A new study published in Emerging Adulthood finds 4 strategies for young people to use to make their transitions back to their parents as positive as possible. Oh, this should be quite good, because I suppose you could theoretically say that, because I sort of moved out for my first year of the university, then I came back, but to be honest, I just did it for money. Because it's a lot cheaper living at home, and I pull my own weight anyway. Yes, and most of these are strategies I would go on to say about how they're justifying it to themselves, it will only be for a short amount of time, and that it's also going to be, they're going to contribute to the household and everything. And yes, then also it mentions about money and everything, and then it also says that the team also pulled out 4 communication strategies that participants use to navigate the move back home in a way that both reduce the experience of stigma and allow them to have an adult relationships with their parents. The first was to develop clear expectations with their parents in order to assert boundaries and set out what living together was look like in reality. Those discussions revolved around topics such as curfew, mealtimes, chores, and other responsibilities. This one really does relate to everyday life, though, because there are so many different reasons why we would move it back in with our parents, even though I have to say I would be so disappointed if I have to move back in with my parents after I've left and got a proper house, a proper house and I'll be living by myself properly. So I definitely understand it from there. But you've also got to think, though, that there are so many good reasons for it, though. For example, like me coming back and living with my parents after university, to be honest, that's not a very good example because that's sort of like the norm. But also, though, I do tons of stuff around the house and I make sure that I contribute to it. But I make sure I definitely don't contribute financially. Okay then, so we're moving on to another one. So we do like this one, and this will be the last one. We're worst at recognising faces from races other than our own, and that can be a major barrier to socialising. Yeah, this is definitely true. I've addressed this a few times in forensic psychology. So the other race effect is the well-documented fact that we are generally poor at recognising the faces of people of races other than our own. Now, researchers have conducted the first formal investigation into how this phenomenon affects everyday social interactions. The study of students of mostly Chinese heritage who had recently moved to study in Australia reveals that both being a victim and a perpetrator makes social interaction more difficult. In fact, the students found it to be a big hurdle to successful socialising as the language barrier. So basically saying that this other race effect is more of a problem than the language barrier. So that I think is definitely quite a shame though, but this is very well documented in stuff like forensic psychology, social psychology, and most of the sub-areas of psychology. And to be honest, I'm not really sure how you overcome it. Very interesting, very difficult to overcome, sadly. So that's another psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. This week has definitely been quite a roller coaster. And it was actually quite funny in some parts though. So I'm going to try and keep it quite short, and I'm just going to tell you the relevant stuff though. So basically, my mum and dad went away for the weekend with my great aunt to scatter a relative's ashes. So they went on the Sunday, then they came back yesterday. But the thing was that I'll get back to that bit in a moment. So on the Sunday, what I did was I went to the British Museum. So I went up on a train. I basically wore a mask for 6 hours until I got home though. So that was fine though, and it was actually really great. So I went up to the British Museum to see the Thomas Becket exhibition, which was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1100s, and then he got assassinated by our king at the time. So that was really interesting to learn about it, and I've got a lot of fiction ideas though. But the reason why I'm mentioning it though is because it was so nice to go back out in the real world. It was so nice to see other people and just talk to them, because I spoke to a few people though, but it was so nice to see people, so nice to get back out into the world, and it was really nice to go to the British Museum. But I hadn't been to the British Museum properly for a good decade, so it was really good to go around and see it all though, and it was really good to go and see the mummies, so I really do recommend the British Museum. And I probably am going to go back later in the year for the Nero exhibition, so the Emperor Nero, because it goes into the myths about him and was he really as much of a tyrant as everyone thinks. So that I really am looking forward to though. And then I've been doing tons of writing this a week though, but not for you guys, sorry, but I have started typing up the reflections for the clinical psychology reflections, and those I have really enjoyed though. So I'm starting to type them up. And I will most probably make them a book, and I'll put that up on a pre-order quite soon though, because I've been working on these reflections for weeks, and some of them are really, really good and really inspiring. Well, at least I like to think so. And then the last two things though that I'll say is that in the UK the vaccines opened up to over 18s, which I'm very pleased about. So I'll be booking my vaccine today, and hopefully I'll get it in the next week or two so I can finally become vaccinated. And then the last thing that I want to say is that yesterday I was so ill. Yesterday I was so ill, and I do not get ill. What happened was that I had a driving lesson at 2 o'clock yesterday, and I do not like driving. I hate it. I keep failing even though I can drive, and it's just really annoying though, and everything though. So I went for that. It went awful, considering it was my first driving lesson of 2021. So basically, no, I can't drive. So tons of stuff happened there. So I got so down, so depressed. I was sort of just, I came upstairs and I was just laying there for an hour on my bed because I felt so down, I felt so depressed and everything though. And then what happened is that I finally managed to get the energy to do something, so I did myself some dinner. But then because of the stress of the driving lesson, I had the world's biggest headache, and I was in bed by 7:45. So that was a massive shame though, because I really wanted to get some stuff done, and there was all stuff like that. So the reason why I'm mentioning it here is that not so much for like sympathy, but I want to remind people, please take care of yourselves. If you're tired, if you're ill, go to bed, even if it's really ridiculous, like 7:45 at night, because your health is really important. But also be kind to yourself, because originally I wanted to come back. I knew I wouldn't have much energy after driving there, so I really wanted to come back, do the podcast, talk to you wonderful people, and that just didn't happen because I had a massive headache, and it would have been really unfair on all of you if you had to listen to me with a massive headache, because I just would not have the energy. Like, sadly though, so just be kind to yourself, and just, don't want anything bad to happen to any of you. Okay, so I've no idea where that was going. But as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. And today's episode has been sponsored by Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, pro-social behaviour and more, 3rd edition. So this is a great book. I really, really do love it. Not only for the beautiful cover and the beautiful hardback, which is pretty cool, but it also goes into so much depth about what causes us to form the friendships and the romantic relationships that we do, and it looks at the biological, social and cognitive factors. So that's really interesting there. But one of my favourite areas is probably the pro-social behaviour bit, because that's got really expanded upon there. That's really interesting, because it goes into why don't we help, because of course we are sort of hardwired from a biological standpoint to help others, make sure that the species survives. So why don't we help when it makes no sense to? And then it also goes into so many other great topics that I really do recommend, including the more practical stuff like communication in relationships. And then it also goes into relationship breakdown, which I think everyone finds it really interesting though. So I cannot recommend this book enough. It's always explained in a really great, easy to understand way. So I really do recommend it. Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, pro-social behaviour and more. Available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the large print, paperback and hardback versions from Amazon or your local bookstore, or get it for free at your local library if you request it. And you can buy the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about 3 beliefs that can harm relationships. Great episode. I really do enjoy this because, as we all know, even though I've never been in a relationship before, though, we all know that there are tons of terrible relationship myths and beliefs that can harm or sadly even destroy relationships. And this is what I hate about these myths, is that they are so damaging. So in this episode, I want to address them, and hopefully, though, we're going to help tackle some, just so people can improve their own relationships. Of course, nothing is ever official advice on the podcast, though. But I also just want to do a quick shout out that my forensic psychology collection is also out today, though, with YouTube in Joyce. That features my free forensic psychology books, so I really do recommend that. And it's available in all of the usual places. So, 3 beliefs that can harm relationships. So the first one I actually really do enjoy. So, distance destroys relationships, because, come on, whenever people are thinking about doing a long distance relationship, there's always someone that says, don't do that, don't be silly, it won't last, and all of those really negative things there, because actually, even if you watch any TV program where the long distance relationships becomes the plot point, there's always so many people saying, right, just a breakup, it's not going to work, you're going to get hurt. And I'm thinking, why don't you just take a chance and all of that stuff? So that's a shame though. Well, however, this is not necessarily true, because the physical distance away from your partner can actually make you closer, which I thought was quite, oh, really? And the reason for this is because, yes, you have to communicate a lot more often, and you have to improve your communication skills, but you also have to make sure that when you're together, you need to maximise your time together and make every second count by doing lots of fun activities. And that's from Just and Hancock 2013. Then another study actually goes into it in a bit more depth, though, because there was a US survey made up of over 1,000 people in a long-distance relationship, and the researchers found that these relationships experienced more dedication to each other, less hostility, more love, more fun, amongst tons of other positive findings. So it actually shows that it's actually quite positive to be in a long-distance relationship. So maybe people shouldn't have to be scared of it. and this can actually make people a lot closer. So the second one is mismatched sex drives, and of course I'm not going to go into graphic detail, so you don't need to skip this. But the common thinking is, though, is that if a frisky person ends up dating a less sexual person, then this will end in disaster and it will never work. And I completely agreed at first, because I just don't see how that would work whatsoever, because just how would it? So that I was a bit curious. Yes, I was a bit curious about though. But research from 2020 found that mismatched sex drives didn't matter, and it didn't spell disaster for the relationship. And if you ever want to see these references, just go to connorwhiteley.net/podcast and you can find the blog post. And then it's at the bottom. Or these mismatched sex drives weren't as problematic as people first believes, because what happened was, and what really matters, is that the overall couple's desire, because people who had high levels of sexual desire between them had high levels of sexual satisfaction, regardless of whether or not they were on the same page. So I thought was quite interesting. But also, though, that's probably my most PG'd section on the podcast so far. Okay, so the last belief is positivity always saves relationships. So this is a really good logical point, because why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't positivity save relationships? Because we all know that positive thinking, also known as our cognition, can influence our emotions, as I detailed in a new book. But also, though, we would have thought, though, that if people in a relationship stay positive, then the relationship will improve. And this does sound logical. But positive thinking only goes so far in the real world, and in terms of the relationship, positive thinking only helps with the occasional smaller problems. And when it comes to these big problems in the relationship, this positive thinking and setting positive expectations can lead to decrease in relationship satisfaction, which means over time it will most probably lead to a relationship breakdown. And focusing on the positive can actually deter people in the relationship from dealing with the underlying issues of these problems. So these problems never get better, which I think is a massive shame, and it really does highlight the massive problem with positive thinking, though. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I really hope that you got something out of it. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it. I'm always really grateful when you help spread the word about the podcast. And please just check out Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, pro-social behaviour, and more, 3rd edition. And this book really does build on what we've spoken about in today's episode. So available in all of the usual places. I really do recommend it. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.